What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. First, I apologize if there's any background noise. This is kind of just an impromptu video, but I wanted to get it out to you as soon as I could because we're all celebrating the fact that Kyle Rittenhouse was acquitted and the system worked, right? The system worked. Wrong. I really don't think the system worked at all. I think it was a failure of the system from start to finish, top to bottom, and here's why. Number one, the prosecutor should have never brought that case to trial, but they did so for two reasons. Number one, they wanted to appease the mob. And the second reason is the prosecutors thought this would be a career case for them. That is a complete failure of the justice system as far as I'm concerned. Now let's talk about the corrupt DA's office. These are the most corrupt prosecutors I've ever seen in my life. Thomas Binger, that genius who pointed an AR-15 presumably at the jury with his finger on the trigger, and then his little minion, the big Pillsbury soy boy. First of all, they attempted to use the fact that Kyle invoked his Fifth Amendment right, the right of all Americans to remain silent, and in front of the jury, and somehow tried to make that seem as though it was incriminating against Kyle. That is a grave constitutional violation that every attorney should know. It's day one law school stuff as far as I know. And as a result, the judge blew up on him and the defense requested a mistrial with prejudice. If you're not familiar with mistrials, there's a mistrial where the defendant can be tried again, and then there's mistrial with prejudice, which means the defendant cannot be tried again for those charges. And had the system worked, that mistrial with prejudice would have been granted right then and there. And then second, the judge ruled early on in the case that there was certain evidence that was just not admissible, yet the DA's office brought it up in front of the jury, regardless of whatever the judge's decision was, which resulted in the judge again chastising the DA's office. But it doesn't end there, guys. Third, the DA's office, the prosecutors, manipulated evidence. They manipulated evidence and gave it to the defense. If you're not familiar, any evidence that's going to be brought to trial and used against the defendant, the DA's office is required by law to provide that to the defense. Why? So the defense can formulate an argument against it, a counter defense against it. So what happened? There was drone footage that the prosecutors essentially, they hinged their entire case on it. They said that it showed that Kyle raised his rifle at somebody, which prompted Rosenbaum to start chasing him down. It kind of basically, they tried to paint Rittenhouse as the aggressor in the situation. So how did they manipulate the evidence? Well, they gave the defense a copy of the footage, but they gave it at 1/3 of the resolution. If you look at the two videos, the prosecution's version is significantly clearer than the defense's version. Why is that important? Well, if the defense has a copy of the video and it's just completely blurry, they can't see anything that's going on, how are they going to raise an argument against whatever the prosecution is going to bring? And worst yet, the prosecutors knew that they had done that, and that is against the law. How do I know they know? Because they were off camera, didn't realize they were being recorded, and the Pillsbury soy boy told Binger that their version was much clearer than the version that the defense had. And they did so on purpose. How do we know this? Because they had two different software to export video. Every other piece of evidence that was given to the defense from the prosecutors was done so by Dropbox. Dropbox allows for an exact copy of the footage, the same exact resolution, except that one piece of evidence that they used a different program, lowered the resolution, and exported it in a completely different file name. Two different pieces of evidence, two different videos. Yet another example of complete corrupt behavior on part of the prosecution. Now let's talk about the judge. Everybody seems to be singing the judge's praises. Understandably, he seemed to be fair and impartial, and he wasn't allowing the prosecutors' corrupt behavior to take place in the courtroom. But the one decision that mattered the most, the decision to rule upon a mistrial with prejudice, which he should have done, he didn't rule on. Let me ask you, had this been any other case whatsoever, do you think the judge would have ruled a mistrial with prejudice? I think he did. So what does that tell us? That tells us that even the most fair, impartial judge, was he influenced by the mob and fear of retribution? I think he probably was. Now let me ask you, if a judge is not acting accordingly how he should, how are you supposed to ask a jury to rule fairly without fear of the mob or fear of retribution? Yet another example of a failure of the justice system. Now, one thing I'll say is this is all speculation. Perhaps the judge was waiting to get a verdict, and had a guilty verdict came in, he would have ruled mistrial with prejudice. If you don't know, if a guilty verdict comes in, you can still rule mistrial, but if an acquittal comes in, you cannot. And maybe had a guilty verdict come in, he would have ruled a mistrial? That is something we will never know. But one thing is for certain: the prosecutors made a complete mockery of the justice system, and they violated the rights of not only Kyle Rittenhouse, but every single American who still believes in due process. The entire trial, from start to finish, top to bottom, like I said, complete failure of the American justice system.